Welcome back to Busch History. I'd like to finish up this topic on the South and slavery by going through some questions and answers. These questions and answers, or the questions specifically, come directly from the College Board as part of preparation for the AP exam. So let's take a look and see what we've got here. What was the Black Belt? Black Belt started in northern Maryland and spreads around, starts to head west through the southeast part of the United States. Specifically, it was fertile soil that was ideally used for the growing of cotton. And some people say it was called the Black Belt because of the expansion of slavery. A little politically incorrect, even though it might be factually correct, because as this rich black soil spread, slavery spread throughout it. And that was where the planter elite were making most of their money in the southern part of the United States. Continuing, the War of 1812 and the flush times of the 1830s led a massive southern expansion. Which southern areas were particularly affected? Well, that would have been, once again, the Black Belt in the area just west of the Appalachian Trail, because that's where the money was flowing into as a result of this money that had been made from trade just after the War of 1812, before the French and the British had settled some of their differences. Compare the number of southern slaveholders with non-slaveholders. Strangely enough, there were fewer non-slaveholders than there were slaveholders. There were 64% of the southern people did not own slaves whatsoever, which meant most of the slaves were owned by 36% of the people. So even though the stereotypes would have it that slavery was dominant in the South, while it might have been a dominant part of the southern economy, it wasn't a dominant part of the lifestyle, because slaves were expensive. And since slaves were so expensive, it was difficult for the average yeoman farmer to own a slave. So in reality, the amount of southern slave owners was rather small compared to the way that Hollywood and history typically portrays it. Which occupation opened to free blacks in the South, but not in the North? There was a fair amount of freed black workers in the South, and the work ethic and the ability of the black man was well known. And those tasks that were heavily dependent on manual labor were open to freed blacks. Typically, they were things like blacksmiths and carpenters, masons, manual labor in terms of builders, people who worked loading and offloading ships, because the dominant amount of free black workers were in the two major port cities, New Orleans and Charleston, with Charleston still being the dominant one, although New Orleans was heavily internationalized and it was very acceptable for free blacks to be in New Orleans. Moving along, this is a kind of funky question that was on the College Board website. But anyway, what they like to do is they like to draw comparisons to other points in history. So here you go. How the relationship of Tenskwata and Tecumseh, that's how you pronounce them, compared to Denmark Vesey and Gullah Jack? Well, it's just as it appears, meaning Tenskwata helped Tecumseh in the Pan-Indian movement, and Gullah Jack helped Denmark Vesey in his attempt to rebel against white control in South Carolina. So they were co-conspirators more than anything else. A very interesting story is Nat Turner. Describe Nat Turner's activities and how did his actions influence Southern thinking. Nat Turner was a trusted, educated slave in Southampton, Virginia. And he had a vision. His vision told him to rise up and overthrow the whites. It was odd because it had pretty much become accepted that if you treated a slave well and you taught that slave manners, that he would be beholden to you and not want to rebel. Well, that's certainly not true with Nat Turner, because after receiving a vision from God, he led this uprising. He killed 51 whites and he had a gang of about 75. After doing this, they went on the lam in the woods and they were eventually caught and hanged. The result of this was a huge debate in the Virginia populace and in the Virginia legislature. They debated, what should we do? These slaves are very dangerous. Should we free these slaves? Or should we clamp down? Well, there was a big debate about this. And there was a short period of time where it looked like Virginia might actually free their slaves, but no. That wasn't going to happen, not yet. Instead, what they did is they passed these Nat Turner laws, and these Nat Turner laws basically forbade slaves from having the freedoms that Nat Turner had. So slaves could not be taught to read and write in Virginia. Slaves could not be allowed to travel freely in Virginia. Slaves could not gather together in Virginia in groups of more than 3. It was all an attempt to basically prevent future conspiracies. But that debate over emancipating the slaves in Virginia also showed there was an internal conflict. And that conflict would show itself even more when Virginia finally secedes, but part of it breaks off, and that becomes West Virginia. Because Virginia couldn't decide in its entirety whether it would be with the South or with the North at the beginning of the Civil War. What was the numerical relationship of slaves to free Southerners? It was roughly 1/3 to 1/4, depending on exactly which census you looked at. There were 3 to 4 million slaves and about 12 million white Southerners. So there was a significant amount of slaves controlled by a very small amount of the population. The internal disagreement over slavery I just mentioned when we were talking about Nat Turner in Virginia. I'm not going to go through it again, but it just shows that the South was not entirely united in its opinion on slavery. And I'm going to leave that there. The next chapter, or the next topic, will be taking a look at the North. Remember, these are combined. They'll be in the same folder on www.buschhistory.net/YouTube. So when you're going to looking for them, simply look for topic number 8. Now I'm going to head forward to chapter 12 in Farragher's Out of Many, which is going to be an analysis of the North and its industrial base and how the North was working while the South was dependent completely on cotton. So we'll be right back.